Everyone, good evening. And I want to begin by trying to get you all of your 100% attention. I want to start by saying that I am so proud of how this conference has come together, the organization, the level of discourse. I think there's no other meeting that I've ever been part of that has brought together the very best academics with the very best practitioners. So I want to thank all of you for attending this two-day conference and engaging in incredible discourse. Thank you very much. Now we are actually to the fun part of the program. The first part will be an announcement of our 3 award winners. And Anya will do that. When your name is called, please come up. We will have a plaque for you, and we will give you a hug, have a picture taken. And then you can return to your seats. So I'd like to introduce Anya, who will be announcing the awards.
So these are the awards for the successful partnerships that we had through the Partnership Challenge that we announced last year. Over just 1 year, we've seen groups of researchers and practitioners who have come together to develop an idea and actually implement that idea and come out with some results for us. And we have a first prize, we have a second prize, and we have a fan favorite. As part of our Partnership Challenge, as economists, we wanted to provide incentives. And so we actually have 2 tiers of incentives. We had incentives for practitioners. We had some monetary prizes just for forming the partnership at the front end. And for researchers, for the winning teams, we have additional incentives. So the first prize actually is $5,000 of funds that can be used for research or in any way that the research team deems is worthy. Second prize is $2,000, and the fan favorite is $1,000. So I hope you all voted. We think all of these partnerships were great, and we are very proud to have all of these partners represented here today. I'm going to start with the fan favorite. So if it was the Academy Awards, I would get it out of an envelope. All right. So by far we had the fan favorite with the most votes from the audience was the impact of choice set size and heterogeneity in giving, which is Ayala Gnizi, Liz Keenan from UCSD, and John, so please come up, and John Behar from The Life You Can Save. So thank you very much. Oh, wow. All right.
Give them a hug. Congrats.
And now we have the second prize. No, not yet.
Going on the blog.
All right. Thank you so much. Second prize goes to It's Not the Thought That Counts. Catherine Eckel, David Herberick, and Jonathan Meir from Texas A&M. And Larry Cooper from the Association of Former Students. Is he? Yes. All right. So these guys have carried out a field experiment, and now they can't figure out how to do a photograph. And now we have the first prize, which goes to Who Gets Funded Faster? Nicole Argo and Tamar Krishnamurti from CMU, David Klanowski from Pitt, and benevolent Megan Kashner and Emily Britton. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting with Benevolent way back before we started SPI, so I'm very excited to see them all here. Now, one thing I also wanted to say is that the organizations that have come up so far have been large but also small, and so that really speaks to the ability of smaller charities to partner with researchers as well as larger ones.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you very much. That was really excellent. And everyone, congratulations. Even the folks who were not called up here, very difficult decision. All of you have been doing excellent research. I want to congratulate all of you. So now we are to the main course. Chuck Longfield will be giving the dinner time talk tonight. So in 2012, Edie went to the Arnova conference. And Edie met this fellow named Chuck, which I found out about 3 minutes after Edie talked to Chuck. I started receiving voicemails, text messages, emails. John, you have to meet this guy immediately. Fly here, do whatever you can to come and meet Chuck. I said, Edie, forget it. I am way too busy for this nonsense. I do not have time for these people that you are bringing into my life. So Edie comes back and says, look, John, this guy is your kindred spirit. This guy is trying to revolutionize the sector in a very different way than you have ever imagined, and in a way that will complement exactly what we're doing at SPI. So that just got my interest a little bit. So I said, okay, let's set up a phone call. So we set up a phone call, and immediately, it's fair to say that Chuck had me at hello. So sweet. And by the way, I'm happily married with 5 kids, if anyone's letting their imagination run wild. Chuck said, John, what interests you? And I said, you know, one very difficult question has been gnawing at me since I started to do field experiments in charity in the late 90s. And that one question is, I don't know if when I work with a charity and I increase the level of giving for that charity, I don't know if that's outright theft from another charity or if we are truly expanding the pie. And at that point, it was almost like putting a quarter in Chuck, because he had thought much more deeply about that issue than what I ever imagined. And he basically took over the rest of that call, teaching me about the sector, teaching me about the richness of the data that he had gathered, by and large, is a pioneer for specific firms that ended up being purchased by Blackbaud. So at this point, I'm thinking, now I really do have to meet this guy. Edie was exactly right. We need to set up a personal meeting so I can learn more from this master. So we met in August. This past August, first time we met face-to-face at Harvard. I was teaching a summer institute class, and Chuck met me in the science building. I still remember, in the cafeteria of the science building. And I had about an hour and a half between sessions I was teaching. And unfortunately, the first 45 minutes were spent talking about our kids and all the athletic events they had been playing. And I learned Chuck was a true kindred spirit. He had twins, much like me. His twins played hockey. My twins focus on baseball, and Chuck is very interested in baseball as well. But then near the end, about halfway through, near the end of the conversation, we got down to brass tacks, and Chuck delivered data. And what I mean by delivering data is he started to show me, here are the data that we have, and here's exactly how we should think about analyzing the data. And that's very, very unique from a non-academic. I think one of the most appealing characteristics that academics bring to the partnership is a manner in which we can look at mounds and mounds of data, beat it up, and try to tell a causal story. I really think that's our unique comparative advantage. Chuck has that, and it's something that by and large, as I told Chuck at the end of that conversation, you really should have been an academic. I'm glad you decided not to be an academic, because what you're doing right now is so very powerful and important to our sector that I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to introduce my friend Chuck Longfield. Chuck, please come on up.
Thanks, John. I don't like staying behind there. Actually, I have a couple of confessions to make. So my first confession is that when I was an undergrad at Harvard and spent a lot of time in that science center, I worked for a professor at the School of Public Health, and he did a lot of research there, and I actually even published a paper with him. But he desperately wanted me to become a researcher and continue to work with him. And I think especially because what we were doing was a lot of cell biology, and my name is Charles Lewis Edward Longfield. But if you just switched the two middle initials, my initials were Cell. And he thought that would have been just perfect. But the second confession I have to make is I made a really big mistake just before dinner. And I was out in the reception area for an hour screaming in conversation. And near the end of the hour, it occurred to me that I was losing my voice and that I needed to talk for a while here. So I actually just ran out to CVS, just before John introduced me, to get some throat lozenges that I've taken. And so they may be the limiting factor in me continuing here. But I had this fear that I was going to still be there when John was introducing me, like wondering, where did he go? He was here a second ago. Well, first I'd like to thank John and the SPY team that have just been wonderful over the past couple of days that I've been here. It's been a great conference. I've really enjoyed myself, and you guys have been great hosts, and really appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank the Templeton Foundation. None of this would be possible with the work, without the work that you're doing and the resources that you're providing. For much of the last, actually nearly 40 years that I've been working, I have had the pleasure and the privilege of working with so many of the nation's leading nonprofits, literally hundreds, if not thousands of them. During that time, I have built software systems that nonprofits use to manage their donor databases and make the fundraising decisions and implement the business practices that all of you do research on. But I've built systems for Red Cross and Habitat for Humanity and Special Olympics and March of Dimes and Easter Seals and diabetes and arthritis and public broadcasting and just an enormous number of organizations. It's been a very rewarding career. And then for almost all those organizations, I've also had the pleasure of analyzing their data. My degree is in applied math and statistics, and I've always joked that it's like a kid in a candy store. I actually have access to all of those databases, all their donor records, all of those transactions and interactions, and there literally is almost not a single philanthropic question, I feel, that I couldn't answer by turning to these databases and asking them. And it's part of why it's so much fun getting to know John and all of you, because I think that we can really bring life to a lot of that data that's available that those organizations allow me to analyze and figure out what works and what doesn't. I actually wanted to start with the story. So all of those years of experience have actually given me a sort of a set of observations and perspectives that I want to share with you tonight, but I want to start with the story. Earlier this year, I attended a lecture by a woman, Ellen Zane, in Boston. It was actually at Lesley University. And I love going to conferences that are outside of my field, and many of you may do this, that you almost, even though what they're talking about is something you know virtually nothing about, I feel like you always learn something that has parallels to the work that you do. And this talk by Ellen was the ex-CEO of Tufts Medical Center in Boston, and she's on the board of numerous healthcare companies, and she's a healthcare expert. And her talk was on the principal drivers of healthcare expense. And many of the drivers that she was talking about are things that all of us are aware of, and they're mentioned all the time. But one of the drivers that she mentioned really struck me as kind of unusual. I would never have guessed it. She mentioned that a principal driver in healthcare expense was the variability in medical practices by doctors. And I sat there thinking about that and thinking that, you know, doctors to me seem like the most regulated profession in the world, that almost all doctors do everything almost exactly the same way. And you know, I have very active children that play sports, and so I spend a lot of time in emergency rooms, and it seems like they do it the same way every time I go there. But my experiences have always been that doctors go through very rigorous training, they go through testing, there's a lot of ongoing professional development. And as far as I could tell, and then there's also always the looming, liability of being sued if you don't do it the right way, that it always seemed like they did it the right way. But according to Ellen, that wasn't the case. And as an example, she highlighted that there are constantly innovations being discovered in the medical profession by researchers, and that those innovations are not employed by doctors in a uniform way. And so she mentioned appendectomies. And it turns out that 1/3 of doctors do all appendectomies surgically. 1/3 of doctors do virtually all appendectomies arthroscopically. I should pick an example that has fewer syllables, but anyways, do it arthroscopically. And then 1/3 of doctors do sometimes arthroscopically and sometimes surgically. But it was the doctors that do it always surgically because the surgical procedure leads to greater complications, and the procedure itself is a higher cost. And that if those doctors were better trained to know when to do it arthroscopically, we'd save $5 billion. And so there were many examples like that cumulatively led to an awful lot of additional healthcare expense. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, I was surprised at that. And then I chuckled to myself because I thought, my God, if she thinks there's a lot of variability in medical practices, she should visit fundraising. Fundraisers have a lot of variability. And so I thought, you know, if I picked 100 nonprofits, some of you, I've actually used this example already today, is that if I picked 100 nonprofits in different fields or all in identically the same fields. So I could pick 100 zoos or 100 PBS stations or 100 art museums or 100 almost anything. And I asked the people who ran fundraising, almost any business practice, fundraising practice, I probably would get 100 different practices. And they all would say, for the most part, that their practice was the best practice. And I'm going to give an example, and I don't have visuals for this. I gave a presentation earlier this week on Monday, and I actually had the pictures of these things. But last week, I decided to collect the slips that I got in direct mail solicitations. You know, the little pieces of paper that have, I think you call them bins, but check off boxes that say, you know, 100, 200, 300, you're supposed to check off an amount. And so I decided that for 1 week, I give to a lot of nonprofits. Part of it is sort of professional curiosity, but also I enjoy supporting these causes. So there's maybe 50 nonprofits a year that I support on a regular basis. So last week, I got a lot of solicitations. And the first one was from Special Olympics. And Special Olympics, oh, and by the way, the amount that I give to many of these nonprofits is usually $100. And so many of these nonprofits, their ask strings, those bins, would always start with 100 or have 100 in them because that was my previous gift. Sometimes it's a different amount, but many of them it's $100. So I get Special Olympics, and Special Olympics says $100, and the next bin says other. So, pretty flexible. I can either give 100 or any amount that I want to give in the next bin. So the next solicitation I open up is from St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And St. Jude's decides, well, they're going to one-up Special Olympics, and they're going to say 100, 150, 200. And I love speaking to this audience because you're all pretty adept at math, so I can actually say that they had a 50% increase, and then they replicated that $50 increase and then said other. The next solicitation was from a small local nonprofit called Emerald Necklace. And they decided to be slightly less aggressive. And they decided to actually, instead of going up, to go down. So they started at 150 and said 125 and 100. And then they also threw in other. The next one was from Parkinson's Foundation. And Parkinson's Foundation decided that they would just go up in even 100 increments. So it was 100, 200, 300, 400. But next to each amount of money, they said what $100 would translate into at the Parkinson's Foundation. So $100 would buy me 4 calls into their call center asking for medical health, or maybe that was like 200, and 100 was so many books that they could hand out on Parkinson's. So they translated it into that. The next one was from World Wildlife, and World Wildlife decided to be more clever. They actually had unusual amounts of money, like $52 in the ask string, instead of rounding it out. And I've actually done research on unusual amounts of money actually have some merit because people don't like to stay on unusual amounts of money. It turns out that, and this is, I'm digressing a bit here from those things, but people get stuck on amounts of money. Some of you may have done this research, and if you give $100 too many times in a row, you tend to give that amount of money virtually forever to the nonprofit. 90% of people who do it 4 times or more never will switch the amount of money. But people who give unusual amounts of money, sort of the 1832 Society, give $18.32, they don't like doing the math in their checkbook for $18.32. They are desperate for you to ask them for $50 or $100 so they can get onto something more even. So it's actually rather easy to get people to upgrade from unusual amounts of money to another higher even amount of money. So World Wildlife was clever, and they made the amounts unusual amounts of money. The next one, oh, by the way, I skipped my second favorite. You know, the second one went up, and the third one went down. The fourth one was from the Perkins School for the Blind. And the Perkins School for the Blind, my last gift, had been $500. And God bless those fundraisers, because this is what they decided made the most sense. They asked for $500, $400, $600, and other. They thought, well, if some people go up and some people go down, we'll go up and down, or down and up. So they actually were almost the most clever. That wasn't my favorite. My favorite one was the last one. And the last one was from a brand new organization. I had 20 by 20 by 20. And they threw everything but the kitchen sink into their reply device, which was oversized, very crowded. They actually had all the techniques. They translated the amounts of money into how much blindness I would cure with that amount of money. They circled the middle one, and they had a little pointer that says, this is the one we recommend. But then they had 2 more innovations that none of the other ones had, which also have a lot of science behind them. They had one that said, by the way, you should almost ignore this reply device. Go to our website and give the gift on the website. Now, that's actually an interesting technique, because when you go to their website, they don't know who you are. And so the website can't be informed for ask strings, because they don't know whether I'm a $1,000 donor or a $50 donor. And so they have to have a very generic set of ask amounts on the website. But it turns out that I've done some research on websites, and if the same person gets driven from the reply device, the same person gets driven to the website, they give about 15% more money on the website, because it's them and their credit card, not them and their checkbook. And it's more sobering at the end of the month when you're writing checks against your checkbook because you're seeing the amount go down. And so it's better to drive them to the website. But there isn't actually an interplay between those amounts of money and the website, so it's actually a little more curious whether I gain or lose, or they gain or lose when I go to the website. And then the last innovation that they had was they asked me, instead of giving those amounts of money, to give monthly, and to actually give $5 or $10 a month. And it turns out there's a lot of science behind that that says that if they could get me to give monthly, I'd have a higher retention rate and a higher average gift, and my lifetime value would be far greater. Now, I'm done. That's it. There were a lot more, but they were mostly versions of those. But I have a great group here, and you should be able to answer this question. Which one was the right one, the best one? Right? You've done a lot of research. Which one was the best one? Right? Well, we don't know. We don't know. And that's unbelievable. Because as somebody pointed out today, I love the comment that most money is actually given through major gift fundraising. We spend all this time on direct marketing, which is true. But if I had to tell you how much money has been spent on analyzing direct mail appeals and ask strings, and there can be that much variability among the nation's leading nonprofits, not having basically any decision of what could be that optimal ask string. And when you think about it this way, all of those ask strings, I'm sure if I asked them, they would all say theirs was the best, right? So they would say, no, the way we do it, we've tested it, this is the best. But they were all asking the same person. So are they really thinking that me, with all of my beliefs and decision making, that I would behave differently to each one of those nonprofits, and they each are optimizing the outcome for themselves? That I would actually prefer going down at Parkinson's but going up with St. Jude's Children's Hospital and pick the optimal amount? Of course not. All right? So I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm going to now switch to something else. So in 1984, I was actually implementing a system in Washington, D.C. at a PBS station. And the fundraiser at that PBS station, Sue Richmond, had a fundraising practice. What she said, she asked me to do in the software that I was implementing, she said, I need you to make sure the software does this. They're a membership organization. And the membership organization is like a subscription. So if you give in January, and then the year goes by, when we get near December, I need to start asking you to renew your gift. Because if you don't renew your gift, by the next January, your member benefits stop, right? The subscription stops. And so, but sometimes these donors in the middle of the year, like in June, send in an extra $25 because you're asking them for an additional gift. So they send in $25. She decided that if somebody was a really good donor to the PBS station, and she got to the end of the year and they didn't renew, but they gave an additional gift or did something like that, that she would give them a few extra months, just on her, a few extra months of benefit, and that she would then put them into another renewal cycle. So she would ask them to renew, but if they didn't renew, instead of saying, you know, you deadbeat, will you come back, she said, I'm just going to give you a few extra months, and then she'd ask them again. Now, I was intrigued by that, and sort of the math statistics side of me, because I had implemented systems at almost every PBS station that was large in the country, and nobody else did that. And so I would think, well, either it's a good idea, and everybody should do it, or it's a bad idea, and WETA shouldn't do it. The Washington station is WETA. They shouldn't do it. But I just can't think that it's the people in Washington behaving differently that they would actually be good for Washington and bad for everybody else in the country. So a few years later, I'm actually having dinner with the fundraisers that run the fundraising at the top 5 stations. So Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Boston. And I brought this topic up. And I said, you know, you all have different practices. You're all a PBS station. How different can fundraising be at the different PBS stations? You have the same programs on air. You probably attract the same people. And so I brought up this fundraising practice. And I said, you know, you should create a research consortium where you fund collaboratively research. Instead of doing it each yourself, like Washington discovers this, you should all fund 1/5 or 1/100th of the research and figure out which ones are the best practices. And they said, you know, that's not a bad idea. We'll do it. And so they asked me to research topics for them for a few years. Every 3 months, we would come up with a different topic. And we decided to start with this topic. And so I analyzed this topic across the 5 stations, and it turns out, long story short, that the practice is a great idea. And the Washington station makes about $50,000 more net dollars a year by doing it than the other stations don't get because they don't do it. And that if all of the public broadcasting stations did it, they'd make $2 million more. No, that won't get you another season of Downton Abbey, but it's not chump change, $2 more across all of those stations. So I dutifully wrote up exactly how you do it, how the WIDA station did it. I gave it to PBS because they could give it to all the stations in the country and hold webinars and teach them how to do it. And a couple of years later, I checked to see if anybody was doing it, and you probably won't be too surprised, but WIDA was still doing it and nobody else was doing it. All right? And on Monday, because I was in Washington, I actually asked the Washington station if they're still doing it. They've gone through 2 new fundraising directors since then, and the one they have now said they stopped doing that. They stopped doing that. And so here's a practice that enough research was done, at least in this industry. There's about 140 TV stations, about 600 radio stations, that they could make millions more dollars, but they don't, because they don't do this practice. So, third story, and then I'll get to the point of this, is that a couple of years ago, now that I've sold my companies and I actually don't have to worry about making money in quite the same way, and Blackbaud gives me quite a bit of latitude to do research, I decided that I was going to create a much bigger research group. And so I asked 100 nonprofits around the country to join a little research collaborative. They're in all the states around the country, and they're all different sizes, and they collectively raise about $450 million in fundraising. So the average size of the nonprofit is $4.5 million, but some of them are very small, a few $100,000 of revenue, and some of them raise $30 million. And the first thing I did was build something into all of their computer systems, because these people use every computer system under the sun, and fewer than half of them use Blackbaud systems. So they have different vendors. Some of them even built their own fundraising systems. But I put something in all of their fundraising systems so that they send me all of their donor data and all of their transaction and interaction data all the time, automatically. So I have a database that has these 100 nonprofits in it, which allows me to do some analysis a little bit easier than constantly begging them to send me another file of data and then receiving it in the wrong format and making the request again and hunting down those files and telling me that they don't have time to generate the file right now. Can I wait till next week? It just comes to me all the time. This was about 4 years ago when I implemented it. But then I did something interesting. I actually looked at all of their results in all of the major fundraising areas. So how well they do major giving and planned giving, how well they do acquisitions and renewals and add gifts, how well they do online fundraising and sustainers, how well they do matching corporate giving and even vehicle donations and local canvassing. And what I did is I tried to identify, by looking at the data, which of these nonprofits were really good at what they do. And what's remarkable about nonprofits, especially nonprofits of this size that have limited resources, is that most nonprofits can't be good at a lot of things. They actually can't. And I know, they really, really can't. And the reason is they don't have resources, enough resources to be good at a lot of things. They have resources to be good at a few things. But they actually, unless you get really large in scale, and there's only a few organizations that do this, for them to actually excel in all of those areas that I mentioned. But what was remarkable was that I could actually point to a nonprofit that maybe was in California and San Francisco and say, you know, you guys do a remarkable job at matching corporate giving. And you in Boston, you do an amazing job at monthly giving. How do you do that? And so I spent a year or two asking those questions. How do you do that result? And I started compiling the practices. And what I then did is I figured out for each of those nonprofits, how much money would they gain if they did the practices that have already been discovered and are actually being employed at another nonprofit successfully? How much would they make if they actually did that? And that amount of money was $270 million. So that could get you another season of Downton Abbey. That's a lot of money, $270 million a year, right? So now, because of my prior experiences just writing up what those practices are, my first inclination, which would have been wrong, would have been, well, just write up the practices and give them all the list. Give them all the matching gift best practices, the sustainer best practices, the major gift best practices, planned giving best practices, the additional gift best practices. Just give them the memos. But I'd know that I'd come back in a few years, and I'd probably be past my retirement age, is that they wouldn't have done it. So I took a slightly different approach on this. And this, I think, is the important part. Because in these last few years, I've decided that I'm only going to focus on the last mile. And what is the last mile? The last mile is actually getting the money. Right? These nonprofits only fundraise because they need the money for their mission. They could find another way to get the money. Maybe if the Templeton Foundation just gave them the money, they would stop fundraising, right? They only fundraise for their mission, right? And so they want the money. And where we fall short as a collective industry, where I fall short, is I have spent 37 years telling them the things that they should do to make money. But all too often, they don't make any money. I make money. I became rich. They didn't become rich. And it's frustrating to actually realize that and be honest about that. And so how do you do the last mile? Well, here's an example. So one of the practices that I discovered that, so first year retention of all nonprofits is abysmal. I mean, pathetically abysmal. 10 years ago, nonprofits, all nonprofits in the country, retained 35% of their new donors. Now think about that. You do all this work, you get somebody to come to an event, you send out mail, you get a gift, and you lose 65% of the people in the next year, right? That's unbelievable. I mean, if for-profits worked that way, they wouldn't be in business. So you lose 35%. That was 10 years ago. Those were the good old days. Today, nonprofits retain 28% of first-year donors, 28. And there's many sectors that are down almost to 20%. And the number is going down. There's lots, I could speak for a long time about why, but the demographics and lots of things are against new donors. There are no new donors, basically. And so these organizations need to retain donors. Well, there's a fundraising practice that retains new donors. If you call, some of you may know this, if you call a new donor on the phone after they give their gift, and you have a 30-second phone call with them, and you say, hey, Joe, just want to thank you for the gift. We really appreciate it. Our organization can really use the money, and we're really thrilled that you chose to give us a gift. Have a great day. Have a great night. And hang up. Don't ask for a gift. Don't ask for a gift. 30-second phone call. If you do that with a new donor, they give 40% more money next year. Their retention rate goes up by 20%, and their average gift goes up by 20%. So the revenue retention of all the people that you called is 40% greater. Now that research was discovered by a woman, Penelope Burke, about 10 years ago, and she wrote it in a book, Donor-Centered Fundraising. And nobody does it. Nobody did it. She wrote about it. People read it. Her book sold pretty well, but virtually nobody would do it. I would sit in an audience, stand in an audience, giving talks like this to thousands of people. This was a few years ago. I've now talked about it so much that people are actually doing it. But I would say to the audience of thousands of people, anybody call new donors and thank them? And not a hand would go up. And then occasionally somebody would say, well, I called the $1,000 and up donors and thanked them for their gift. And it's like, well, God bless you, but I'm talking about calling everybody and thanking them for their gift because it goes up 40%. Now, what if I took a picture of that book and the research that Penelope Burke did, and I sent it out to 100 nonprofits that are in my research group, and I told them to call the new donors? Well, they won't do it. They wouldn't do it. They would want to do it. They would desperately want to do it. But they would say, well, we had a volunteer that volunteered to make the calls, but then the volunteer stopped volunteering, so we don't have another volunteer. Or they said, well, I gave it to Amy, but Amy left, and she got married, and we haven't replaced Amy yet, so we're not doing the calls. So this is what we did. So I decided, well, $270 million is a lot of money to just leave to chance. So I said to the nonprofits, would you just let me go get you the $270 million? Now, that's a remarkable statement, because first of all, there's no way, Blackbaud, we're going to let you go get $270 million for us. You're not going to do it. So I understand that, right? I'm a vendor. I don't feel like a vendor most of the time, but I do know that I actually am a vendor. And so what I did is I said, well, I have good intentions here, so this is what we'll do. I will create a nonprofit in Boston. I will hire 2 of the people from your 100 nonprofits. I will move them to Boston. They will run this nonprofit. This nonprofit will make all of your thank you calls for all of you. They will hire a telemarketing company. We will sign a contract with that telemarketing company. We will get a rate of 50 cents a phone call because we will guarantee hundreds of thousands of thank you calls. 1, Idaho. I'm calling from Idaho, just thank you, bye. I'm calling from Montana, bye. And so we now do 280,000 thank you calls a year for these 100 nonprofits. And we have generated tens of millions of dollars for them. And by the way we did it, because you have to really prove this out. You can't just say to these people, this is going to work, because they're all going to say, I don't think so. And so we took 3 nonprofits the first year, 3 nonprofits that were our friends, and we said, would you let us call your donors and thank them? Okay. And we come up with data tracking techniques. We called the donors, and then we sat and we waited a year. And then we analyzed the data. And sure enough, all 3 nonprofits were like 40%, 45%, 42%. Okay. So then we said, well, why don't we do more? So we did 12 the next year. And we did 12, and the results were the same. And we did control tests where we don't randomly call some people and randomly call some people, and we can show we're generating the money. And after a while, they said, you know, this actually works. So we called 280,000 thank you calls. And so the purpose of my talk, really, in those examples is that there's a lot of variability in fundraising practices. And by the way, a little bit, I'll just mention that fundraising is part art and part science. You guys have discovered or are discovering the science part of it. But many of the people that get attracted to fundraising get attracted to it because of the art of fundraising. They're very good at creating the emotions and the words and the images that get all of you to open up your wallets and make donations. To them, that is fundraising, that I am trying to get you to feel what you need to feel to make a donation. The problem, however, is that fundraising isn't just art. It's a lot of science. And what happens too often is the art blurs the line over onto the science side, so that ask string, which we probably could construct to be the best string and the best approach to actually ask people for optimizing a gift amount, we could do that. The problem is that there's going to be a fundraiser at Perkins School for the Blind, wow, say that 5 times, Perkins School for the Blind, that's going to say, I think it would be great if it goes down and then up. Why don't we try that? And that's not a really good idea. And right now, when we do that, I make the analogy like to the medical profession, that what if my doctor said, oh, that penicillin thing, everybody else uses penicillin. I'm not going to use penicillin. I'm going to do it a different way. You know, they constrain me. It's supposed to be 2 pills a day for 14 days. You know, everybody does it that way. We need to have some art in the field of medicine. They'd get sued, you know? And so, but there isn't any fundraising malpractice. Every fundraiser can do that any way they want, and it's all good. But it isn't all good, because many of those things I can quantify how much money they just cost their organization because they did it that way. And we have a culture. This isn't just, by the way, the discovering of the practices. We have to get good at discovering the practices. And all of you are working on that. That is important. And the second half of that is we have to figure out how to create a culture in this industry that says that when you figure out that something works, and there was a great point today that you have to make sure that it doesn't just work at one organization, it works at all organizations. But when you discover that it works at all organizations, we need to figure out a way to get all organizations to actually do it. and to feel that they're compelled to do it that way unless they have amazing evidence that proves that the alternative works. In the same way that that doctor would have to have amazing evidence not to use penicillin and to try it a different way. So, the last message I'd like to deliver is sort of a hopeful one. By the way, I'm hopeful on the whole thing, but is a hopeful one. Is earlier this week, on Monday, I was meeting with the chief development officers of the 100 largest nonprofits. So think of everybody whose name you'd recognize. So the Special Olympics and Habitats and Red Crosses and UNICEFs and such. And it's something I do each year, and I am friends with many of those people, and so I run a little TED Talk with them, and I have pretty knowledgeable people come, and we discuss what the trends are in philanthropy and stuff. In the room was nearly $20 billion of philanthropy, the people responsible for raising $20 billion. And at the end of the day, I decided to take about 45 minutes, and I was sort of tough love conversation. I said to them that I found it relatively appalling that each of them looked out for their own self-interest, for the most part, and did not do very much collaborative research. In other words, Red Cross will figure out if disaster donors, if there's a way that they can get disaster donors to renew better, but they're not doing that research with Doctors Without Borders and with UNICEF and with Save the Children and with those other organizations. They're doing it themselves. Now, you could say, well, okay, but that's a little bit of their self-interest because they compete with those other organizations. They don't really compete with those other organizations. I mean, that 5 minutes after any one of them does anything new, the rest of them knows it. It's not like these are corporate secrets that are like at Citibank that are trying to keep from Bank of America. The whole world is going to know whatever they do right after they do it. They all are on each other's lists anyway, so the second they do it, they're actually doing it with the fundraiser over here, so he knows that they just did it. And so I said, do you really think that if we found out the best way to do an ask string, or the best way to find out if we're over-soliciting a donor, or the best way to do a major gift moves management set of techniques, that wouldn't work at everybody else? And so, a long story short, they thought, actually, you're right. We should do this. And they've decided to create a consortium of many of those organizations and pool their money, and even more important, pool their data. They have a lot of data. And pool their intellectual capital and partnerships, and partner with all of you to substantially increase the amount of research that's being done in this sector, and then also work on the dissemination of that. And so I'm very excited. I can't wait, actually, it's all happening in 1 week, to actually go and now start meeting with them and figure out exactly how all of that's going to work. But I think that there's a lot that we can discover together, and you guys are all doing great work, and I think coupling these organizations that have $20 billion at stake, they have a few dollars that they can spend on this work, and more importantly, as we talked about, they want to partner. They actually want to run these experiments, and the thing I always love about these people is that whenever I experiment with them, we test like 1,000,000 of something. We don't test like 1,000 of something, because I have a statistics degree, and I understand that a sample size of 1,000,000 is way better than a sample size of 1,000 if I'm trying to figure stuff out. They have a lot of donors. So anyways, I'll stop there. And I'm happy to take any questions if I know it's not optimal forum for that, but if anybody has any questions. Yep.
I'm intrigued by your idea you're talking about sort of fundraising malpractice, and I wonder if you have
Try not to make that like the name of my title, because I don't want to become known as like doctor, whatever, Yeah.
Like, we know these things,
Yeah.
why aren't fundraisers doing it? To what extent, though, do you think it's the fundraisers, and to what extent do you think it's their boards getting in the way?
Oh, there's lots of, yeah.
Because I've served on clinic boards myself,
Yeah.
and I've seen this often, and how, like, somehow every board member all of a sudden thinks that they're a fundraising
Oh, yeah.
expert.
Yeah,
And, your professional staff may say, research shows this, we know this, we know that. No, the board members all say, we can't ask this, we can't do this. So, any ideas or any
Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, we could make a laundry list of all of the reasons why they actually don't do it, or why they vary the practices, and board members would be right up there, especially at the smaller organizations, but also the big organizations. You know, they too, you know, the fundraisers are always fighting with them because they have some clever idea that they want to play out, and then a lot of times they have money to actually then encourage you to play out the stupid idea, so no, they'd be right up there too. You know, my point is that we have a field that there is not a great body of evidence, and there isn't rigorous training of the professionals in that body of practices. And so when you think about the medical profession and all that they go through, the reason they do what they do is they've been trained to do it, and they have tremendous confidence that there's been science behind penicillin, and somebody really did do the clinical trials, and that it really does work, and stuff like that. And we don't have that. But what's amazing about trying to change a profession, you know, John said, jokes that I'm trying to change like a profession, is that in 1905, the medical profession was actually just like the fundraising profession. To be a doctor in 1905, some of you may know this, be a doctor in 1905, you needed a high school diploma and 1 year of post-high school education. And that education could be in bloodletting, could be in anything. So in 1905, if you were a doctor with a degree from Harvard Medical School and you were a doctor with a degree from Bloodletting University, you both were MDs. And the public couldn't tell the difference. There were so many people that were doctors. Doctors made no money. They were dirt cheap, kind of like fundraisers today. And well, fundraisers are actually good ones. Their salaries are going up. But what happened in 1905 is this guy Flexner asked, and the American Medical Association asked the Carnegie Foundation for $1 million to actually come up with recommendations to improve the medical profession. And they came up with the system we have today, which was not a high school diploma or college diploma, 4 years of post-college education, an exit exam, and then they reaccredited all of the schools of medicine, and they closed 2/3 of them. And what happened almost overnight was there was a shortage of doctors, salaries skyrocketed, and the profession became the profession it is today. So you can have an effect, but what we do need to do is deal with all of those drivers of what are all of the reasons that allow a fundraiser to say, I'm going to do it differently. I'm either going to do it differently because a board person told me, because I don't have enough money, because I'm short of staff, because I don't know, because I have the best intentions, and I got this idea. I mean, I run... One of the services I started about 25 years ago was a benchmarking service for nonprofits that were peers. So Harvard gets to benchmark against Yale, and the Big Ten against other Big Tens, but then American Heart against American Cancer. And I sat in a meeting once with this fundraiser, just God bless her. She was from a Planned Parenthood chapter, and it was a benchmarking meeting of Planned Parenthood chapters. And she said her results were in the tank. Her fundraising results for the last year were decimated. And she stood and said, everybody wanted to know, why did your results go down? She said, you know, I thought it would be a great idea to just stop all those mailings and to ask our major donors just to give more money. And she said, you know, that wasn't really a good idea. And so her results had plummeted. Best of intentions, she wasn't trying to sink the organization, but she thought, well, you know, there's all these small givers, and we got these big givers. If I give them more attention, then I'd make up the money. And maybe she's right at some level, but she didn't have the tools and the techniques and stuff. You know, anyway, why don't I see if there's another question? But I was going to tell a story about that, but I'll never get to any more questions, if there are any more. If not, I'll tell the story. So. Any questions? Other questions? Yeah.
I want to come with John's original question there. So do you feel that these all fundraising activities are actually increasing the pie so that they're not actually competing with each other?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah.
You know, I mean, as far as I know from the evidence, 2% of GDP is not
Yeah.
stable.
Yeah.
So why would they be cooperate?
Yeah. So the question is do I believe, in a sense you're asking my, personal or as informed as it is opinion, is the pie actually getting bigger, or are they just basically trading gifts? So I'll tell you about 2 research things that I've done. One that John and I now are working on, where I've turned the data over to him, but I'll tell you one that I actually completed, but that still needs more analysis. But so in the 2012 presidential election, I was actually sitting in my office after the election, and fundraisers call me and they say, my fundraising is down, and it must be the election. Those politicians sucked all the money from my donors, and they gave them to Obama and Romney and these senators and stuff. And I always just joke that anybody who's up doesn't use it as the excuse. Anybody who's down, that's the convenient excuse. But nobody had any data on that. So I'm sitting there thinking, there aren't that many people in this country that could answer that question, but I can answer the question. And so I said to my research assistant, go get me all of the data on all of the political gifts given during this campaign. It turns out the FEC just gives you that data basically for free. And so it was $5 billion of donations, and it gives you the names and addresses and stuff. And so we got that data, and I said, match that up. I have a database of everyone in America and who lives in their household and pretty much everything about them, so 140 million households. So I matched it up to that, and then I matched it up to billions and billions of dollars of donations across thousands of organizations. And I said to him, I just want a report that says the people who gave political gifts last year, how much money did they give in 2012 to charities over what they gave in 2011? And I want you to compare that to the people who didn't give political gifts. And it turns out that the people who gave political gifts are among the most generous people in America. Unbelievably generous. Actually, if you want to research a group. And they gave 7% more money. In addition to giving the $5 billion, they gave 7% more to charity in 2012 than they gave in 2011. And the people who gave no charitable gifts gave 3% more. So, and the overall philanthropy went up 4% that year. And so in addition to giving all that money to politics, $5 billion that they clearly hadn't given the year before, there wasn't a presidential election, so they gave $5 billion there and drove up their philanthropy. And the reason is this is what conclusion I come to, is these people believe in the power of their money to change the world around them, their community or the country. And they're going to spend it, and I actually understand that now. When I sold my company, I grew up very poor, but my... One second. So my mom was very philanthropic. Wow. One second. So anyways, but now I have resources to actually donate. So I actually understand them, because I look around and I think, you're not doing what I want you to do. I don't care who you are, nonprofit, politician. I am going to sit with you. I am going to give you money, and I want you to do what I just told you to do, right? And so people who have resources do that. They believe that they can do that. Now, what was remarkable about that study is I then segmented it at every income level. So people that are poor, that have almost no money, they gave 7% more to philanthropy when they gave a political gift. So they might have only given $25 to a politician, they gave more to philanthropy. And so it had nothing to do with wealth, it had to do with the belief that I can make these changes. And so I believe the pie is getting larger. And I have enough data, and John and I will look at this in general in philanthropy, but when I look at these 100 nonprofits, I'm going to be able to say, as I raise this $270 million for them, did the $270 million come from the other nonprofits they supported? I don't believe that it will. And I believe that these practices, I'll give you one practice that if most nonprofits could just do one thing, this is what they should do right now, is they should stop soliciting their donors and they should sign them up to give monthly, right? That the people who give on a monthly basis give about 30% more per year because of the retention rate and the average gift than those same people give when they're giving with you sending me a piece of mail. And it reduces the fundraising costs because I don't have to ask you anymore. I just charge your credit card or do a bank transfer, which is even better than the credit card. There's services now that will keep the credit cards up to date, so I don't have to worry about you changing your credit card number or your expiration date. And there's almost like a land grab now. But I'll give you this example. There was in my group, there's a nonprofit in St. Paul, Minnesota. and they had some sustainers. And the guy who runs fundraising there is a really smart guy, David Preston. And he doesn't like anything that I tell him that he's not good at. And I told him that he wasn't good enough at sustainers, that monthly giving. And I produced this one-page report that says how they're doing in each of the areas, and I make it real simple for them. I actually have a red, green, and a yellow light next to each fundraising technique. So it says sustainers, and it has like a yellow light. And so he hates yellow. He wants green on everything. And so he saw yellow or red next to sustainers, and he said, like, what do I have to do better on sustainers? So I gave him the list of the things that he needed to do. This was 2 years ago. He was at 9% sustainers. Today he's at 36% sustainers. So he's increased the sustainers. Every single sustainer that he has converted to sustainer has given him $50 more a year. His total revenue, fundraising revenue, has gone up 10% a year for 2 years in a row by converting these people to sustainers. He's still going up 2/3% a month. I believe he's going to peak around 50, 60%. When he gets to the number like 60, 65%, almost all of his revenue for the following year is guaranteed. Right? Can you imagine a fundraiser who goes into a budget cycle and almost all of his revenue is going to be guaranteed, and he only has to raise, or she only has to raise, a little bit of money to actually make budget? That's extraordinary. And so, I forget how I started with that, but anyway. So no, I don't think it comes out of anybody else's pocket. I think you, in your mind, were giving them the membership gift of $100. You switched to $10 a month. You're now giving $120. Maybe you've tightened up the cycles you're giving. I don't think you think, I got to cheat somebody out of $20 now because I'm giving them $20 more. I just don't think that happens. And by the way, the data that I gave John already about giving is that when somebody gives to a new nonprofit, they almost never, there are a number of nonprofits supported. So I gave them 2 sets. The people who gave to a new nonprofit in a year, how many people they support, and how many people, the people that didn't give to a new nonprofit. And it goes from like 4 to 6.2. So when they gave to a new nonprofit, they actually didn't give to one new nonprofit. They gave to more than one new nonprofit. It went from 4 to 6. And so what I think is actually happening is I think people's personal circumstances are changing. They actually got a job, they got a raise, they sold stock, they did something, and they supported new nonprofits, and they're on a different trajectory. You still might have to analyze who's going down the ladder, right? But that's a different problem. I don't think that they're actually trading it off with somebody else. So, which is good to know, because if that's not true, then we're all screwed. So there's no reason to do what we do. All right, no other questions. All right, have a good night. So, thanks.